They called him the King of Wall Street, but he was about to learn that real royalty doesn't need to shout. Harrison Sterling thought he had it all: the IPO of the decade, a supermodel on his arm, and a boring wife he could finally discard like last season's couture. He signed the divorce papers in a crowded Michelin star restaurant, thinking he was trading up. He had no idea that the woman crying quietly across the table wasn't just a housewife from Connecticut. She was the estranged daughter of the most powerful queen in Europe. And when you break a princess's heart, you don't just lose a wife, you declare war on a crown. This is the story of how a billionaire lost everything by underestimating the quiet girl in the corner. The sound of a spoon clinking against fine bone china had never sounded so violent. To the rest of the patrons at Le Bernardin, it was just another Tuesday night in Manhattan. The air smelled of truffle oil and old money. But at table 4, the corner booth reserved for the city's elite, a silent execution was taking place. Harrison Sterling checked his Patek Philippe watch for the third time in 2 minutes. He was a handsome man, in that sharp, predatory way that New York finance worshipped. At 38, he was the CEO of Sterling Dynamics, a tech conglomerate on the verge of a historic merger with a European defense firm. He wore his arrogance like his bespoke Italian suit, impeccably tailored and impossible to ignore. Across from him sat Sarah. She was looking down at her hands, which were folded neatly in her lap. She wore a simple beige cashmere sweater and no jewelry, save for the thin gold band on her ring finger. Her hair, a mousy shade of brown, was pulled back in a severe, practical bun. To the outside world, she was the starter wife, the invisible woman, the mistake Harrison had made before he became a billionaire. "Did you hear me, Sarah?" Harrison's voice was low, devoid of any emotion other than mild annoyance. "I said, the lawyers have drafted everything. The townhouse in the West Village is yours. I'm also giving you a generous settlement. $5 million. It's more than fair, considering we had a prenup." Sarah finally looked up. Her eyes were a striking, unusual shade of violet, the only feature of hers that ever drew a second glance. They were wet, but she wasn't sobbing. She possessed a terrifying stillness that Harrison had always mistaken for dullness. "It's not about the money, Harrison," she said softly. Her accent was a flattened, generic American dialect she had perfected over 6 years. "It's our anniversary." Harrison sighed, rolling his eyes. He reached for his wineglass, swirling the vintage Bordeaux impatiently. "Don't be dramatic. We haven't been a we for years, Sarah. You know this. I need a partner who fits my life now. Someone who can stand next to me at galas, who can charm investors. You're happier at home with your books and your gardening." He didn't mention Bella. He didn't have to. The tabloids had been doing that for him. Bella DeVille, the 22-year-old runway sensation, who was currently the face of Gucci and Bad Decisions. She was loud, vibrant, and looked devastating, in a backless dress everything Sarah wasn't. "Is this about the merger?" Sarah asked. "The European deal?" Harrison froze for a split second, then scoffed. "Don't try to talk business, Sarah. It's adorable, but unnecessary. This is about us. I've outgrown this. I've outgrown you." He pulled a thick manila envelope from his briefcase and slid it across the pristine white tablecloth. It hit the centerpiece with a heavy thud. "Sign it. Tonight. I want this done before the press conference on Friday. I don't want any baggage dragging me down when I ring the opening bell." Sarah looked at the envelope, then she looked at Harrison. For a second, the air around her seemed to shift. The mousy, shy demeanor cracked, revealing something colder and far more ancient beneath. She straightened her spine, and suddenly she looked taller sitting down. "You are making a mistake, Harrison," she said. Her voice didn't tremble. "Not because you are leaving me, but because of how you are doing it." "I'll take my chances," he sneered, tossing a black Amex card onto the table to cover the untouched meal. "Go back to Connecticut, Sarah. Find a nice accountant. Live a quiet life. It's what you were born for." He stood up, buttoning his jacket. He didn't look back. If he had, he might have noticed that the maitre d', a man named Jean-Luc, who had served royalty from Monaco to Oslo, was staring at Sarah with a look of pale, terrified recognition. Sarah didn't touch the envelope. She waited until Harrison was out the door, into the waiting flash of paparazzi bulbs that she had spent 6 years avoiding. Jean-Luc approached the table, his hands trembling slightly. "Madame," he whispered, dropping the American formalities. "Do you require assistance?" Sarah looked at the maitre d'. She exhaled. A long, shaky breath, and the Sarah Winters mask began to dissolve. She reached up and pulled the pins from her hair, letting it fall. It wasn't mousy brown. The roots were growing out, revealing a shimmering, natural platinum blonde that she had dyed for years to look ordinary. "Yes, Jean-Luc," she said, her voice changing. The flat American vowel sounds vanished, replaced by the crisp, clipped, received pronunciation of the ultra-elite. "Please bring me a phone, a secure line. I need to call my mother." Jean-Luc bowed low. "Immediately, Your Highness." Sarah picked up the divorce papers. She didn't sign them. Instead, she took a pen from her purse, a fountain pen, with a crest engraved on the cap that Harrison had never bothered to look at closely, and wrote a single note on the front of the envelope. "Checkmate." She stood up. "And Jean-Luc, if anyone asks, Sarah Winters left an hour ago. She doesn't exist anymore. And who should I say was here, ma'am?" She turned to the window, watching Harrison's limousine disappear into the rainy New York night. "Tell them Serafina was here, and she's going home." The next morning, the headlines were brutal. Billionaire upgrade. Sterling dumps frumpy wife for model Bella DeVille. Harrison sat in his corner office on the 50th floor of the Sterling Dynamics building, reading the New York Post with a smug grin. The photo on the front page showed him exiting the restaurant, looking powerful and unbothered. The inset photo showed Sarah leaving 20 minutes later, looking small and pathetic under a large umbrella. "You're a free man, Harry," his COO, a sycophant named Greg, laughed from the leather sofa. "And just in time. The stock is up 4% just on the rumor of the divorce. The market loves that you're shedding the dead weight." "She was a sweet girl," Harrison said dismissively, swiping through photos of Bella on his iPad. "But she had no ambition. She didn't understand this world. I need someone who can help me secure the European contracts. The royals over there are obsessed with image." "Speaking of Europe," Greg said, sitting up, "the Grand Duchess of Ethelgard is hosting the Gala of the Century in Vienna next week. It's the key to the defense merger. If we get an invite, and you show up with Bella, it seals the deal. We become a global superpower." Harrison nodded. "Get me that invite. I don't care what it costs." Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away, a Gulfstream G 650 jet with no registration markings touched down on a private airstrip outside of London. The rain was torrential, but the moment the stairs lowered, a phalanx of black Range Rovers pulled up. Men with earpieces and umbrellas swarmed the tarmac. Sarah, now Serafina, stepped off the plane. She had changed out of her beige sweater. She wore a black trench coat tailored to perfection, dark sunglasses, and a scarf wrapped around her head. A tall, older man with silver hair and a military bearing stood by the lead car. He bowed sharply. "Welcome home, Your Highness. Her Majesty is waiting for you at the palace." "Thank you, Arthur," Serafina said. "Does the press know?" "Not yet, but the Queen is displeased. She has been watching Mr. Sterling's antics on the news." Serafina's lips tightened. "Mother always did hate him. She called him a merchant the first time I showed her his picture. She used a more colorful term this morning, ma'am." They drove in silence through the English countryside, bypassing the main highways. They didn't go to Buckingham Palace. That was for the Windsors. They went deeper, to the shadowed, ancient seat of the House of Calum. The Calum family was older than the Windsors, wealthier than the Vatican, and operated in the shadows. They didn't cut ribbons. They moved borders. When the car pulled up to the massive iron gates of Calum Manor, the guards snapped to attention. Serafina looked out the window at the gray stone walls she had run away from 7 years ago. She had wanted love. She had wanted to be normal. She had met Harrison in a coffee shop in Boston, where she was studying art history under a fake name. He had been charming, driven, and seemingly uninterested in her background. She thought he loved her. She looked down at her phone. A notification popped up from Instagram. It was Bella DeVille, a selfie of Bella in Harrison's penthouse. Sarah's old home, wearing Sarah's favorite silk robe. The caption read, "Out with the old, in with the bold. Number, upgrade." Serafina felt a cold, hard knot form in her stomach. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was the icy resolve of her bloodline. She walked into the grand foyer. The marble floors echoed with her heels. At the top of the double staircase stood a woman who terrified prime ministers. Queen Catherine of Calem didn't look like a grandmother. She looked like a predator in pearls. She stood straight, her silver hair coiffed into an immovable helmet of authority. She held a cane, not because she needed it, but because she liked to point it at people she was about to destroy. "Look what the cat dragged in," the queen said, her voice echoing through the hall. "Hello, mother," Serafina said, removing her sunglasses. The queen descended the stairs slowly. She stopped 2 steps above Serafina, looking down at her daughter's red-rimmed eyes. "I told you," Catherine said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I told you that American mongrel would bite you. You played peasant for 7 years. You cooked his meals, you cleaned his socks, and he threw you away for a billboard model." "I know," Serafina whispered. "He humiliated you," the queen hissed. "Which means he humiliated me. Which means he humiliated the crown." The queen reached out and lifted Serafina's chin with a gloved hand. "You are Serafina Victoria Calem. You are the heir to the throne of the 7 valleys. You do not cry over a man who sells microchips." "I'm not crying, mother," Serafina said, her eyes hardening. "I'm planning." A slow, terrifying smile spread across Queen Catherine's face. "Good, because I have just received a request from his company. It seems Mr. Sterling is desperate for an invitation to our gala in Vienna next week." Serafina's eyes widened. "He wants to come to the winter ball? He thinks it's a networking event," the queen laughed. A dry, harsh sound. "He has no idea who hosts it. He has no idea who you are. Give him the invite," Serafina said instantly. "Oh, I intend to," the queen said. "And a +1 for his harlot. Let them come. Let them see what real power looks like." Serafina turned to the mirror in the hallway. She looked at the woman reflected there, the Sarah who was too plain, too boring, too quiet. "Burn Sarah's clothes," Serafina told the butler standing nearby, "and get the royal jeweler on the phone. I need something to wear for Vienna. Something that says, 'I own you.'" "Red?" the queen suggested, arching a brow. "No," Serafina said. "Gold, like the money he loves so much. I want to look like the thing he can never afford." 2 days later, the invitation arrived at Sterling Dynamics. It didn't come through the mail. It was hand-delivered by a courier from the Austrian consulate who refused to leave it with a secretary. He waited 40 minutes until Harrison Sterling stepped out of a meeting, handed him a black velvet box, bowed once without a smile, and left. Harrison carried the box into his office, feeling a rare flutter of nerves. Greg, his COO, hovered over his shoulder like an eager vulture. "Open it," Greg urged. Harrison flipped the latch. Inside, resting on white silk, was a card made of heavy cardstock, edged in real 2/4 carat gold leaf. The crest at the top was embossed deeply, a double-headed hawk clutching a sword and a rose. "Her Royal Majesty, Queen Catherine of Calem, commands the presence of Mr. Harrison Sterling at the Winter Solstice Ball. Hofburg Palace, Vienna, white tie, decorations." "Commands?" Greg let out a low whistle. "Not invites? That's aggressive." "It's power," Harrison said, running his thumb over the gold leaf. A smirk tugged at his lips. "She's the matriarch of the Calem family. They own half the titanium mines in Europe. If I get 5 minutes with her, the merger isn't just happening. It's going to make me the richest man in the hemisphere." He picked up the phone and dialed Bella. "Pack your bags, babe," he said when she answered. "We're going to Vienna. And Bella, throw out whatever you were planning to wear. I'm hiring a stylist. This isn't the Grammys. You need to look like you own a small country. Uh, Harry, Bella whined through the phone, the sound of a blow dryer in the background. I have a fitting for Victoria's Secret on Friday. Can't we just Zoom them? Harrison hung up. He looked at the empty chair across his desk, where Sarah used to sit sometimes, waiting for him to finish work. She would have known who the Calums were. She read all those dusty history books. For a second, a flicker of annoyance passed through him. Sarah would have been useful here. She knew etiquette. Bella, Bella was going to be a project. 3,000 miles away, in the deepest chamber of Calum Manor, the air was cold and smelled of iron and dust. Seraphina stood before a velvet mannequin. The royal dressmaker, a woman named Madame Leclerc who had served the family for 40 years, was pinning the hem of a gown that seemed to be woven from liquid sunlight. It is aggressive, Your Highness, Madame Leclerc murmured, her mouth full of pins. It's not a dress, Leclerc, Seraphina said, staring at her reflection. It's armor. The gown was gold. Not a subtle champagne, but a deep, burnished metallic gold that caught every photon of light in the room. It was backless, plunging dangerously low, with a train that pooled like molten metal. It was a far cry from the beige cardigans of Sarah Sterling. Queen Catherine walked in, the click of her cane echoing against the stone walls. She was followed by 2 guards, carrying a heavy iron chest. Leave us, the Queen ordered the guards. They set the chest down and retreated. Catherine approached the chest and unlocked it with a key she wore around her neck. She lifted the lid. Inside, resting on black velvet, lay the heart of the valley. It was a necklace of diamonds so heavy it looked painful, centered by a yellow diamond the size of a hen's egg. It hadn't been worn in public since Seraphina's grandmother died. The press thinks this was lost in the war, Catherine said, lifting the heavy piece. The diamonds clicked softly. Harrison Sterling likes assets, does he not? He likes flashy things. She walked behind her daughter and clasped the necklace around Seraphina's neck. The weight of it settled on her collarbones, cold and heavy. He never looked at me, Mother, Seraphina whispered, touching the stone. In 6 years, I don't think he ever really saw me. He saw a housekeeper, a prop. Men like Harrison are blind to anything that doesn't have a price tag, Catherine said, adjusting the straps of the gold dress. So, tonight, we put a price tag on you that he cannot pay. The Queen stepped back, her eyes gleaming with a fierce, vindictive pride. Remember, Seraphina, when you walk into that ballroom, Sarah Winters is dead. You are not his ex-wife. You are the crown princess. And if he tries to speak to you, you crush him. Seraphina looked in the mirror. The woman looking back was terrifying. She was beautiful, yes, but in the way a storm front is beautiful. I'm ready, Seraphina said. Vienna in winter was a fairy tale of snow and gaslights, but the entrance to the Hofburg Palace looked more like a fortress. Harrison's limousine idled in a line of Bentleys and Rolls-Royces. He adjusted his white tie, feeling the starch of his collar dig into his neck. He was nervous. He hated being nervous. Beside him, Bella was scrolling through TikTok. She was wearing a red dress that was, admittedly, spectacular, but it was cut too high on the thigh and too low in the front. It screamed Hollywood, not Habsburg. Put the phone away, Harrison snapped. And for God's sake, don't chew gum. Chill, Harry. Bella popped a bubble. It's just a party. They're just people. They aren't people, Bella. They are the reason money exists. The car pulled up. A footman in full livery opened the door. Harrison stepped out, taking a deep breath of the icy air. He offered his arm to Bella, and they ascended the red carpet. Harrison expected paparazzi. He expected the flashing bulbs he was used to in New York, but there were none. This event was so exclusive that the press wasn't allowed within a mile of the gates. The silence was unnerving. Inside, the ballroom was a cavern of gold leaf and crystal chandeliers. The ceiling was a fresco of gods and monsters. The room was filled with people, but the volume was a low, polite hum. The men wore sashes and medals. The women wore tiaras that were family heirlooms, not loans from Harry Winston. Harrison felt a sudden, crushing sense of inadequacy. His billions meant nothing here. These people had castles older than his country. He grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing tray and downed it. "Stay close," he hissed to Bella, "and don't speak unless spoken to." "Whatever." Bella rolled her eyes, wandering off toward a table of hors d'oeuvres. Harrison stood alone near a marble pillar, scanning the room for the queen. He needed to find her. He needed to make his pitch. Suddenly, the music stopped. The hum of conversation cut off instantly. A major domo struck a heavy staff against the floor 3 times. Boom, 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 boom. Her Imperial Majesty, Queen Catherine of the House of Calem, the voice boomed. The double doors at the far end of the hall swung open. Queen Catherine entered. She wore black velvet and a crown of iron and diamonds. The room bowed. Harrison, realizing a second too late, dipped his head awkwardly. But the announcer wasn't finished. And His Royal Highness, Prince Alexander, the voice continued. A tall, devastatingly handsome man in a military dress uniform stepped out, offering his arm to the Queen. And the announcer paused, and the silence in the room deepened. Her Royal Highness, the Crown Princess Serafina. Harrison straightened up, curious. He had heard rumors of a daughter, but no one had seen her in years. Then, she stepped into the light. Harrison's breath caught in his throat. She was a vision in gold. The dress clung to her like a second skin, shimmering with every step. Her hair, a blinding platinum blonde, was swept up in an intricate braid, woven with pearls. Around her neck sat a diamond the size of a fist. She was the most beautiful woman Harrison had ever seen. She radiated power. She walked with a slow, languid grace, her chin held high, her violet eyes scanning the crowd with bored indifference. Violet eyes. Harrison frowned. The color tugged at a memory, buried deep under layers of narcissism. Sarah had violet eyes, he thought, but Sarah's were dull, sad. These eyes are electric. He shook his head. Impossible. Sarah was in Connecticut, probably crying over a quart of ice cream. This woman was a goddess. The royals descended the staircase and began to circulate. The crowd parted for them like the Red Sea. Harrison watched, mesmerized. As the princess laughed at something, a duke set a light, musical laugh that sounded nothing like Sarah's quiet chuckle. "She's incredible," Harrison muttered to himself. He saw his opening. The princess had separated from the queen and was standing near the fountain, holding a glass of champagne. She was alone for a split second. Harrison straightened his jacket. This was it. He would charm the daughter, get to the mother, and close the deal. He walked over, putting on his best billionaire charmer smile. "Your Highness," Harrison said, approaching her from the side. "I don't believe we've been introduced." The princess turned slowly. Up close, she was even more breathtaking. The scent of her perfume hit him jasmine and tuberose. It was expensive, complex. She looked at him. Her expression didn't change. There was no recognition, no warmth, just a cool, appraising stare, as if he were a piece of furniture she found slightly tacky. "Mr. Sterling," she said. Her voice was crisp, British, and utterly patrician. "My mother mentioned you would be here. The American computer salesman." Harrison flinched. "Salesman?" "I own Sterling Dynamics," he corrected, his smile faltering slightly. "We're actually the leading tech firm in the States. I was hoping to discuss the synergy between our tracking systems and your family's interests." The princess took a sip of her champagne, her eyes never leaving his face. "Synergy?" she repeated, tasting the word like it was spoiled milk. "You Americans use such colorful words to dress up greed." Harrison laughed, trying to recover. "I admit, I'm ambitious, but I'm also a man who knows quality when he sees it. And I have to say, Your Highness, you are the most captivating woman in this room. It's a shame we haven't met before." He leaned in closer, dropping his voice to a seductive octave. "I feel like I would remember meeting someone like you." The princess stared at him. For a second, a flicker of something amusement, pity, danced in her eyes. "You really don't know, do you?" she whispered. "Know what?" Harrison asked, confused. She took a step closer. She was so close, He could see the gold flecks in her violet irises. "You pride yourself on your vision, Harrison," she said, dropping the British accent for just a fraction of a second. Her voice flattened into the American accent he knew so well. "But you never looked past the apron." Harrison froze. The blood drained from his face so fast he nearly fainted. The room seemed to spin. The voice, the eyes, the way she tilted her head. "Sarah?" he choked out. It came out as a squeak. The princess smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just trapped a rabbit. "Sarah is dead," she said, her British accent snapping back into place like a steel trap. "I'm Serafina, and this." She gestured to the ballroom. "The gold, the guards, the power. This is my life. The life you thought was too boring for you." Harrison stepped back, his mind reeling. This is impossible. You cook lasagna. You clip coupons. You're my wife." "Ex-wife," Serafina corrected sharply. "As of Tuesday." She glanced over Harrison's shoulder. Bella DeVille was stumbling toward them, holding a half-eaten skewer of shrimp and looking bored. "Harry!" Bella called out, her voice shrill and echoing in the refined hall. "This party is dead. Can we go? My feet hurt." Serafina looked at Bella, then back at Harrison. The look of absolute withering disdain she gave him was worse than a slap. "She's perfect for you, Harrison," Serafina said coldly. "Common, loud, and temporary." "Wait." Harrison grabbed her arm. It was a reflex, a mistake. Instantly, two royal guards materialized from the shadows. One grabbed Harrison's wrist and twisted it behind his back with agonizing efficiency. Harrison yelped, dropping to his knees. The room went silent. All eyes turned to them. Queen Catherine was watching from the throne, sipping her wine with a satisfied smirk. "Unhand me," Harrison shouted, pain shooting up his shoulder. "Do you know who I am?" Serafina looked down at him, kneeling at her feet in his expensive tuxedo. She adjusted her diamond bracelet, looking bored. "We know exactly who you are, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice carrying through the silent ballroom. "You are a guest who has overstayed his welcome." She turned to the guards. "Throw him out." "And the girl?" "Sarah, please!" Harrison begged, panic finally setting in as the realization of what he had lost crashed over him. "We can talk about this. I didn't know." Serafina turned her back on him, the gold dress swirling around her ankles. "That," she said, over her shoulder, "was always your problem." The cobblestones outside the Hofburg Palace were slick with ice, but Harrison didn't feel the cold. He felt the burning, radioactive heat of total humiliation. He was standing on the curb, his tuxedo jacket torn at the shoulder where the royal guard had manhandled him. Beside him, Bella was shivering violently in her skimpy red dress, tapping furiously on her phone. "My Uber is 3 minutes away," she snapped, not looking at him. "And don't think I'm sharing it with you. You're trending, Harry, and not in a good way." "Put the phone away, Bella," Harrison growled, checking his own device. He had 17 missed calls from Greg. "We need to strategize. The Queen just declared war. I need to spin this before the Asian markets open." "Strategize?" Bella laughed, a cruel, sharp sound. She turned the screen toward him. "Look at this video, genius. It has 2 million views in 10 minutes. Harrison stared at the screen. It was a shaky video taken by a guest inside the ballroom. It showed him on his knees, begging, while Serafina, looking like a golden statue of judgment, looked down at him with cold indifference. The caption read, "Number billionaire beggar, number Queen Serafina, number owned." "You're a joke, Harry," Bella said, opening the door to a black Mercedes that had just pulled up. "I date winners. You? You're just the guy who got dumped by a princess for being too cheap." She slammed the door. Harrison was left alone on the Vienna street. His phone buzzed again. It was Greg. "Harrison!" Greg's voice was high-pitched, bordering on hysteria. "Where are you? The stock is in freefall. It's down 18% in pre-market trading." "It's just a scandal, Greg," Harrison shouted, pacing the sidewalk. "It'll blow over. I'll issue an apology. I'll say I was drunk. I'll donate $1 million to an orphanage." "It's not the scandal," Greg screamed. It's the supply chain. We just got a notice from Ethelgard Mining Corp. They've invoked a force majeure clause. They're cutting off our titanium supply, effective immediately. Harrison stopped pacing. The blood in his veins turned to ice water. Sterling Dynamics built guidance systems for missiles and drones. They required high-grade aerospace titanium. Ethelgard Mining controlled 60% of the global supply. Who owns Ethelgard Mining? Harrison whispered, though he already knew the answer. It's a subsidiary of Calum Industries, Greg said, his voice trembling. Harrison, that's your ex-wife's family. They aren't just socialites. They own the ground we build on. She's choking us, Harrison realized. The boring woman, who used to knit on the couch, was currently dismantling his billion-dollar empire with a single phone call. Fix it, Greg, Harrison roared. Find another supplier. Call the Russians. Call the Chinese. I don't care. I tried, Greg yelled back. No one will touch us. The word is out. Anyone who sells to Sterling Dynamics gets blacklisted by the European Union. She's embargoed us, Harrison. Personally. Harrison hung up. He looked back at the palace. The lights were warm and inviting. He could hear the faint strains of a waltz drifting through the winter air. Inside, Serafina was dancing. He had told her she had no ambition. He had told her she was small. He hailed a taxi, his hands shaking. He needed to get back to New York. He needed to get to his boardroom. This wasn't a divorce anymore. It was a hostile takeover of his life. 36 hours later, the conference room at Sterling Dynamics smelled of stale coffee and fear. The view from the 50th floor of the Manhattan skyline was usually Harrison's source of strength. Today, it looked like a precipice. Harrison sat at the head of the long mahogany table. He hadn't slept, his eyes were bloodshot, and he hadn't shaved. The board of directors sat around him, 12 men and women in gray suits who used to laugh at his jokes. Now, they wouldn't meet his eyes. The situation is critical. The CFO, a woman named Marcus. No, wait, make that Margaret, said, sliding a graph across the table. With the titanium supply cut, we can't fulfill the Pentagon contract. We're in breach. The penalty clauses alone will bankrupt us within the quarter. I can fix this, Harrison said, his voice raspy. I'm flying to Washington tonight. I have friends in the Senate. I can get an injunction against the blockade. You have no friends in Washington, Harrison. A deep voice rumbled from the other end of the table. It was Lawrence Vance, the chairman of the board. He was an old-school shark who had always tolerated Harrison because he made money. Now that the money was gone, the tolerance had evaporated. The video of you groveling to a foreign monarch is playing on a loop on CNN, Lawrence said, tapping his finger on the table. You look weak, and Wall Street hates weak. I built this company. Harrison slammed his fist on the table. You can't oust me. I own 40% of the voting stock. Actually, Lawrence said, a cruel smile touching his lips. About that, the doors to the conference room opened. Harrison spun around, expecting security. Instead, Serafina walked in. She wasn't wearing the gold ball gown. She was wearing a white power suit that was tailored so sharply it could cut glass. Her platinum hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She carried a slim leather portfolio. Behind her walked two lawyers from Sullivan and Cromwell, the most expensive law firm in the city. What is she doing here? Harrison stood up, his face flushing red. Security! Get this woman out! Sit down, Harrison, Serafina said. Her voice was calm, conversational. It was the voice she used to use when asking him if he wanted pot roast for dinner. But the underlying steel was undeniable. You have no right to be here, Harrison spat. This is a closed board meeting. I'm aware, Serafina said. She walked to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table of Lawrence's chair. Lawrence stood up and moved aside, offering her the seat. Harrison stared. Lawrence? What the hell is going on? Serafina sat down, crossing her legs. She placed the portfolio on the table. You mentioned you own 40% of the stock, Harrison, she said. That was true on Monday, but you leveraged 15% of that to cover your margin calls when the stock dipped yesterday. And who do you think bought that debt? Harrison's mouth opened, but no sound came out. And, she continued, the other 20%, the silent partner, shares you sold 3 years ago to fund your expansion into Asia, you thought you were selling to a shell company in the Caymans. She tapped the table with a manicured fingernail. You were selling to me. You? Harrison whispered. But you were home. You were planting hydrangeas. I was managing the royal investment portfolio from my iPad while you were cheating on me with your secretary, Serafina said, a small, cold smile playing on her lips. I've been your biggest investor for 3 years, Harrison. I own 35% of this company directly, and with Lawrence's proxy votes, she looked around the room. The board members nodded in unison. They knew who the new boss was. I control 51% of Sterling Dynamics. Harrison fell back into his chair. He felt like he couldn't breathe. The walls were closing in. You planned this, he gasped. For 3 years? I protected my investment, Serafina corrected. I thought you were a smart man, Harrison. I thought you would grow up. But when you served me divorce papers on our anniversary, I realized you were a liability. She opened the portfolio and pulled out a single sheet of paper. This is a motion to remove the CEO for gross misconduct and incompetence. It has already been signed by the majority. She slid the paper down the long, polished table. It stopped perfectly in front of him. You're fired, Harrison. Harrison looked at the paper. Then he looked at the woman he had ignored, belittled, and discarded. You can't do this, he pleaded, his voice cracking. This is my life. I have nothing else. You have the townhouse in the West Village, Serafina said, echoing his words from the restaurant, and I'm prepared to offer you a settlement. 5 million. It's more than fair. The boardroom was silent. The irony hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Take the deal, Harrison, Lawrence advised quietly. Before she changes her mind and leaves you with zero. Harrison looked at his hands. He looked at the window. He realized, with a sickening jolt, that he was the goldfish now, and she was the shark. I'll sign, he whispered. Good, Serafina said. She didn't gloat. She didn't cheer. She just checked her watch. Security will escort you out. You have 10 minutes to clear your desk. I want the office sanitized before I move in. Harrison stood up. He walked to the door, a broken man in a $5,000 suit. Just as he reached the handle, Serafina spoke one last time. Oh, and Harrison? He turned back, tears of rage and sorrow stinging his eyes. The next time you decide to upgrade, she said, her violet eyes flashing, make sure you know the difference between a rhinestone and a diamond. Harrison walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. Inside the boardroom, Serafina let out a long breath. She didn't look triumphant. She looked tired. Shall we begin? She asked the board. We have a lot of mess to clean up. 6 months. It had been exactly 182 days since the boardroom doors had slammed shut on Harrison Sterling's life. But to him, it felt like he had been wandering in a purgatory of his own making for decades. New York City, the beast that Harrison had once thought he had tamed, had turned on him. The city had a famously short memory for success. Billionaires were minted every Tuesday, but it possessed an elephant's memory for failure. And Harrison wasn't just a failure, he was a caricature. He was the simp of Wall Street, the man who had traded a royal dynasty for a magazine cover girl, the man whose begging face had been turned into a gif used by teenagers to mock their friends. It was a Tuesday night, raining with that specific, bone-chilling hostility that only November in Manhattan could muster. Harrison sat in the back corner of McSweeney's, a dimly lit dive bar in the West Village that smelled of stale beer, lemon polish, and quiet desperation. It was a far cry from the Michelin-starred sanctuaries of Le Bernardin or Percé. There were no white tablecloths here, no obsequious sommeliers to pour his vintage Bordeaux, just a sticky table and a glass of whiskey that tasted like iodine and regret. He swirled the amber liquid, staring at his reflection in the glass. He looked older. The sharp, predatory angles of his face had softened into something jowly and tired. His hair, once styled with $100 pomade, was thinning and unkempt. He wore a coat that had cost $5,000 2 seasons ago, but now the cuffs were fraying, and a button was missing. He hadn't bothered to replace it. What was the point? His phone buzzed on the table. It was the only thing he had left that connected him to the world that used to fear him. A notification from TMZ lit up the cracked screen. Upgrade alert. Bella DeVille spotted on super yacht in street tropez with tech rival Elon Musk's protege. Sources say she called Harrison Sterling a stepping stone to nowhere. Harrison stared at the headline. He didn't feel anger. He didn't feel jealousy. He felt a hollow, aching numbness. Bella had lasted exactly 4 days after the firing. She hadn't even had the decency to break up with him in person. She had sent a personal assistant, a 20-year-old intern named Kayla, to collect her diamond tennis bracelets and her Birkin bags, while Harrison sat in the dark living room of the townhouse. Bella had blocked his number before Kayla had even reached the elevator. He swiped the notification away. The townhouse, the generous settlement he had so arrogantly thrown in Sarah's face at their anniversary dinner, was now his sarcophagus. It was too big for one man. It was silent. God, the silence. He used to hate the silence. He used to hate how Sarah would sit in the living room, reading her thick history books, the only sound the turning of a page or the clinking of her knitting needles. He had called it boring. He had called it suffocating. Now, sitting in the noise of the bar, surrounded by strangers laughing and arguing, he would have given his remaining lung to hear that silence again. He realized now, with the bitter clarity of hindsight, that the silence wasn't emptiness, it was peace. It was the sound of a woman who didn't need to scream to be heard, a woman who had been holding up the sky for him while he was too busy looking at his own reflection to notice. Another? The bartender grunted, interrupting his spiral. No, Harrison said, his voice raspy from disuse. Tab. He paid with a debit card that he had to check the balance of before handing over. The humiliation was a daily ritual now. He walked out into the rain. He didn't have a driver anymore. The company car was gone, repossessed by the new administration. He didn't have an umbrella either. He turned up the collar of his coat, shivering as the icy water ran down his neck. He stepped to the curb, raising a hand to hail a taxi. 3 yellow cabs passed him with their off-duty lights on. A fourth one slowed down, saw Harrison's haggard face and the way he swayed slightly, and sped up again, splashing dirty puddle water onto his trousers. Harrison stood there, water dripping from his nose, defeated by traffic. Suddenly, the blare of sirens cut through the gridlock. The chaotic symphony of honking horns died down as police motorcycles wove through the stalled cars, clearing a path with authoritative efficiency. Pedestrians stopped on the sidewalk, phones raised, sensing power. "Who is it?" a woman standing next to Harrison asked, shielding her eyes from the glare. "The mayor?" "Please," a man scoffed, pointing down the avenue. "The mayor takes the subway for photo ops. That's real money. That's the queen." A motorcade of black SUVs rolled past, flanking a vehicle in the center. It was a Rolls-Royce Phantom, armored and elongated, sleek as a panther, and twice as dangerous. It moved with a silent, heavy grace that commanded the street. The car slowed as it navigated the tight turn near the curb where Harrison stood. The tinted windows were black mirrors, reflecting the neon lights of the city. But as it passed, the rear window slid down, just a few inches. Inside, the cabin was glowing with soft, golden, ambient light. It looked warm. It looked like a different world, a world of safety and power. Harrison saw her. Serafina sat in the back seat. She was working. A laptop was balanced on her knees, and she was speaking into a headset. She wore a suit of midnight blue silk, tailored to lethal perfection. On her lapel sat a brooch, the Kalem family crest, a double-headed hawk made of sapphires and diamonds. She looked different. The softness was gone. The Sarah who baked lasagna and apologized for taking up space had been incinerated in the kiln of betrayal. In her place sat a monarch. Her profile was sharp, her posture rigid, her face illuminated by the blue light of the screen. For a heartbeat, a single, agonizing second, Her eyes shifted to the window. She saw him. She saw the wet hair, the frayed coat, the desperate, pathetic slope of his shoulders. Harrison froze. His heart hammered against his ribs. He took a half step forward, his hand raising instinctively. He wanted to scream. He wanted to shout, "I'm sorry. I'm here. I'm the man you married. Look at me. Hate me. Scream at me. Just acknowledge me." He wanted anger. Anger would mean he still mattered. Anger would mean there was still a connection, however volatile. But there was no anger in Serafina's eyes. There was nothing. She looked at him the way a person looks at a cracked paver on the sidewalk or a pigeon nesting on a ledge. A mild, momentary inconvenience, a detail of the landscape that required no emotional investment. She looked through him, past him, as if he were made of glass. Then, she turned back to her laptop. She said something into her headset, her hand making a decisive gesture. The window glided up, sealing the golden world away from the gray, wet street. The Rolls-Royce accelerated, disappearing into the fog of Fifth Avenue, leaving Harrison Sterling standing alone in a puddle of dirty rainwater. The realization hit him harder than the bankruptcy. He wasn't her villain. He wasn't her enemy. He was just a ghost, a footnote in her biography. High above the city, the penthouse office of the newly rebranded Calum Sterling Tower was a fortress of glass and steel. The rain outside couldn't touch the woman inside. Serafina walked into her office, stripping off her gloves. The view was spectacular. The entire city lay at her feet, a glittering grid of ambition and electricity, but she didn't stop to admire it. Your Highness, her executive assistant, a sharp young man named Leo, stood up as she entered. He held out a tablet. The final decree just came through from the lawyers. "Mr. Sterling signed the papers this morning. You are officially divorced." Serafina took the tablet. She looked at the digital document. Harrison's signature at the bottom was shaky, a jagged scrawl compared to her elegant, looping script. "And the rebranding?" she asked, setting the tablet down on the desk that used to belong to her husband, a desk she had replaced with one made of black marble. "Complete," Leo said, tapping his screen. "The stock is at an all-time high. The merger with Aethelgard Defense is finalized. The board has approved your motion to acquire the titanium mines in Ukraine. And," he hesitated, smiling, "you are on the cover of Forbes next month. The headline they went with is, 'The Princess Who Built an Empire.'" Serafina walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. She pressed her hand against the cold glass, looking down at the ants scurrying on the wet streets, 50 stories below. Somewhere down there, Harrison was walking home in the rain. "He told me I had no ambition," she said softly, the memory of that night at Le Bernardin echoing in her mind. "He told me I was small, that I was born to be a housewife." "He was a fool, ma'am," Leo said quietly. "No," Serafina corrected, turning around. Her violet eyes were dry, clear, and terrifyingly bright. "He was a lesson, a necessary one. He taught me that kindness without boundaries is self-destruction. He taught me that power isn't given, it is taken." She picked up her fountain pen, the one with the family crest, the one she had used to write checkmate on the envelope all those months ago. "Archive the file, Leo. Harrison Sterling is closed business." She sat down at the head of the table. She didn't look back. The boring girl from Connecticut was gone, buried under a mountain of gold and titanium. "Now," Serafina said, her voice steady and commanding, "get the Prime Minister on the line. We have a country to buy." Harrison Sterling spent the remaining years of his life chasing the ghost of the woman he had thrown away. He tried to start 3 more tech companies, but the Calum blockade was absolute. No bank would lend to him. No supplier would sell to him. He was radioactively toxic. He dated a string of models and actresses, but he never found anyone who looked at him with the quiet, steady adoration Sarah once had. He died at 78, wealthy in cash, but bankrupt in spirit, found alone in his penthouse that felt more like a museum than a home. Serafina never remarried. She ruled the Calum business empire with an iron fist for 40 years, becoming a legend in the financial world, a woman who turned a heartbreak into a dynasty. But rumor has it, on quiet nights in the palace, she would sometimes dismiss her guards, sit by the fire with a glass of cheap wine, and read old paperbacks, the only remnants of a life where she was just a girl named Sarah, who loved a boy who didn't deserve her. It serves as a brutal reminder to us all. Be careful who you step on to get to the top, because the ground is slippery, and the person holding the ladder might just be the one who owns the sky. Wow, what a ride, right? If that doesn't teach you to double-check your prenup and treat your partner with respect, I don't know what will. I really want to know what you would have done if you were Serafina. Would you have destroyed Harrison completely, like she did, or would you have just walked away and let karma do the work? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of royal revenge and billionaire heartbreak, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on the next crazy saga. I've got a story coming up next week about a nanny who inherited a mafia empire. Trust me, you do not want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and remember, real royalty doesn't need to shout. See you in the next video. Thanks for watching.